Good morning, students. Today's topic of discussion is business logic and rule-based computing, which is a part of uh, this chapter called custom enterprise applications. This one, custom enterprise applications and Dev 2.0. Um, in this chapter, we would study how a software application can be developed that suits the requirements and needs of a business organization who is not willing to go for ready to use software like ERP, SCM, CRM, or they would prefer to update few components of the existing ready to use applications like ERP, SCM, CRM. How can they develop? We know that Java is a programming language that allows us to create software applications, and those applications can implement the requirements given by the client. There are several other technologies like JavaScript, Hibernate, Struts, several other frameworks. And Java is not the only one. We have got .NET, PHP, several other technologies that would assist in the development of customer enterprise application. You know, an application that is customized to suit the requirements of a business organization. And there is a pattern when you develop an application, you would probably uh, prefer to have a architecture based on MVC pattern or based on layered architecture. There are predefined patterns, and using those patterns and a new application can be developed that leverage the goodness of the architecture which is already defined. All right, these all things we covered. The topic to be discussed now is this business logic and rule-based computing. Actually, in our earlier class, we did a UI, user interface. The primary components in an application are user interface with which user interacts, business logic that performs the functionality of data manipulation, data storage, data retrieval. All right, so and the the last layer would be a backend data storage layer, which would include the databases and persistent storage. So, what does business logic do? What is a business logic? When you try to enter your username and password in your Gmail, you open Gmail page and enter username and password. This the page with which you interact is a user interface. Here user is interacting directly with this page. All right. When you enter this username and password, then what happens? This request has to go to the business logic, the middle tier that deals with this um, operation on the data. What operation has to be performed on the data entered by the user? User has entered username and password. Then this business logic would inherently contact the database. This database contains the data relevant to all registered users and their username and password. This database. When this business logic middle tier uh, contacts the database with these username and password values, if it retrieves exactly similar to the values entered by the user, then you are uh, you know but the business logic will understand that you are an authentic user and inbox will be presented to you. If any one of these does not match, or if this one of these does not exist in the database, there is a mismatch. In such scenario, this business logic would give the error message, send the error message to the user interface. This is a three-tier architecture where you have user interface, business logic, and database. Whenever a data is entered, what has to be done? When the data is manipulated, what has to be done? For instance, after registration on any e-commerce website, say Flipkart or Amazon, you are allowed to change the address. When you edit your address, that address has to be changed or updated in the database as well. And that happens through business logic, not directly. So data manipulation and submitting this data to the server, these all things are done by the um, code known as business logic. And when we talk about J2EE web application server architecture, we see that there is a MVC kind of architecture, and that MVC is layered. The controller layer in the layered MVC architecture is responsible for passing data to the model layer. Controller layer, nothing but the business logic. And following that, um, the HTML form is submitted via a post request. It is passed by the controller layer. Fields are extracted from the received request object and converted to, let us say, Java class, which are passed to appropriate class methods. For instance, a servlet container. And then the business logic code may execute in a separate container, such as an EJB container. What you are doing in J2EE, you have EJBs, you have servlets, you have JSPs. In the context of J2EE, apparently the business logic reside in EJBs, EJB container. In other applications, business logic might reside in servlets as well. But in the context of this J2EE, business logic may execute in a separate container. Otherwise, in a servlet container only, you can execute business logic. And in modern web architectures, Ajax is used. And apart from serving up new pages and handling page submissions, the server also need to process asynchronous HTTP requests initiated by the JavaScript code. Asynchronous, we learned that asynchronous is a mechanism that allows users to interact in asynchronous mode, which means not at the same time. They can be running at different times and still can interact. This is with respect to the example which is presented in this chapter. There is this user form. When user press submit button, then controller will call a function enter order on the object order. This is all implementation details. When you are writing the code, you might be creating an order class. Order class would have an enter order method. And what does enter order method should do? These things, whenever you are doing the actual implementation, you need to have an idea about what are the classes, what are the attributes in each class, what are the methods, and why those methods exist, what is the flow of control in each method, and which method invokes which other method. What does enter order method do? It could example uh, it could, for example, first one is verify whether the order has been completely entered, whether customer ID has been entered, whether each order item has a product ID and quantity, and it may compute the total value of the order after adding shipping charges. And it would then prepare and submit all the required data manipulation statements to the database. These are the tasks. What I mean to say here is you create a method in a class, public class order. In this order, you have enter order. This enter order method would validate the details entered by the user and ensure that all the fields have been properly entered, and it can compute the total order value. You sometimes buy items for which shipping charges would be applicable, that would get added to the total price, and then you get the bill or invoice, and then prepare and submit all the data manipulation statements. All these things have to be recorded in the database. So enter order would perform that task, retrieve the order ID, calling methods to on other objects, for example, order accounting transaction object. So all these things you need to know when you are implementing certain operations in a class, in any programming language. It's not necessary to be Java. Here, the examples given are from Java. You can do these things in any language. For instance, Python, PHP, .NET. Functions of business logic, validations, that is verification of the details entered, computations, computing the total transaction management, means accomplishing all required operation in the scope of a single database transaction. data manipulation, which happens after inserting of the. Here example taken is order form, order items. It is a specific case. However, you can generalize these functions to any problem as such. Calling other business logic methods, complex search, all these are the tasks of business logic. Rule-based computing. It is an abstraction based on formal logic. What is the abstraction? What is the uh, task that is being done in this rule-based computing? Rules are useful for modeling validation rules as well as many other computations, evaluating risk or rating insurance policies. For instance, if you take if number greater than 10, else if number greater than 20 and less than 10, and else if what are these? Number greater than 30 and number less than 20. These are the rules. A rule system contains logical statements that may or may not become true when evaluated against facts. What is the fact? Enter a number. When you enter a number, if it is 100, the fact is that the value of number is 100. And these are the rules. If number greater than 10, the fact is number is 100. And here you are evaluating this rule against this fact. This is known as rule-based computing. In artificial intelligence also we learned rule-based systems in which we define, like if a patient has cold and if a patient has runny nose, if a patient has sore throat, the conclusion would be patient has got um, seasonal fever or viral fever or whatever, flu or something, fever. This conclusion you are drawing from these rules. If these rules are satisfied, conclusions can be drawn. Rule 1 given here as an example: for all x, for all y, for all z, order of x and order item of y and order of x or order y and valid order item y and customer of x z, z is the customer of x, and customer z means this is customer implies valid order x. When you can say that order is valid, this is the rule. The rule is that there is an order x that contains an item y, and this y is a valid item, all right, and there is a customer z and customer z has placed an order of y item in order z. If all these conditions fulfill, apparently it is said that order is valid. This is rule based computing. This is another rule. Please go through that rule. This topic is about modeling business logic using MapReduce. What is a MapReduce? MapReduce, we know that it is a part of Hadoop, big data, and it can be deployed on cloud environment. Here, this paragraph talks about TCS Instant app. There is an app, TCS Instant app, that uses a visual formulation called logic map that is based on MapReduce cloud programming paradigm, borrowing from MapReduce merge model that extends MapReduce for relational processing. This is all about a particular application which shows visually a logic map. That logic map is essentially based on MapReduce cloud programming paradigm, which is which has derived its model architecture from MapReduce merge and extends MapReduce for relational processing. And then what is a logic map? It is a graph that creates, search and update nodes, each corresponding to pages of some application form. There is an application form, HTML form you consider. That form uh, um, would be modeled in the form of a graph, create, search and update nodes. There will be node. You can create a node, you can search a node, you can update a node. And each node corresponds to one page. This is page 1, this is page 2, this is page 3. These are the pages of some application form, and these nodes manipulate relational records in the same manner as corresponding pages of their associated forms, but without a user interface. And such nodes can also be viewed as map nodes in the MapReduce parlance. MapReduce, we learned in our earlier classes that whenever there is a large problem to be solved, it is divided up into smaller problems or smaller tasks, and each computer system would solve the smaller task, and finally the results from all the systems uh, are collected together to uh, to provide the result for that larger problem. The same concept is being harnessed here in the form where you are modeling the uh, forms, application forms. Here you have got application forms which are nothing but the pages, and you are modeling those pages, and you have got uh, these pages. Each one is known as a node, and with respect to MapReduce parlance, means MapReduce terminology, this one will be called as map nodes. Look at here, this is a logic map. Order, products, valued orders, customers, these are all forms. And here, this form would contain order ID, customer ID, product ID. Here it is receiving customer ID. Here also it is receiving customer ID, product ID. All these inputs, and that website. You consider any website. That website would have some pages that you are modeling in this form. Okay, and it is called as a logic map. And those contains map nodes. And in addition, There are compute nodes, merge and reduce, that perform computations on records obtained after joining. You have to join the uh, data to generate the aggregated result. That is all about the description. Please go through. I have posted this textbook in your classroom. Please follow that. Inside Dev2 model driven enterprise interpreters. So, so far we concentrated on finding patterns that could be formally modeled, such as user interface patterns via the form abstraction, rules for business logic validations, and logic maps for data manipulation, control flow and search function of business logic. And the motivation was, once application functionality has been modeled in terms of such patterns, migrating an application to another technical architecture can be accomplished by first re-encoding the elementary patterns of the model using new technology and then reassembling the application from a higher level representation. This paragraph states that whatever software you write, you need to model it. If you model it and if you learn its pattern, and in future if you have to migrate that application to newer technology, then it would be easy to uh, migrate the application because the pattern is clear and the architecture is known. When pattern can be directly interpreted, such as in the case of some rules engine, application functionality could be dynamically changed at runtime. If the patterns are known, then dynamically application can be changed, which would give a lot of benefit in terms of time and performance. The model driven architecture MDA approach is popularized by OMG, Object Management Group, and modeling application functionality at different levels of abstraction is used as the basis for model transformation. Model at a higher level of abstraction are transformed to those at a lower level. At the lowest level, actual code in a general purpose programming language is generated. Model driven architecture, there is a group known as Object Management Group that has popularized this architecture, which will uh, model the application functionality at different levels of abstraction, at database level, at business logic level, as user interface level, for instance, or at class level, subsystem level, system level, lowest level to uh, highest level. When this levels abstraction and of models of higher level abstractions are transformed to those at a lower level. At the lowest level, actual code in the general purpose programming language is generated. If you are modeling at the method level, then followed by class level, automatically code can be generated. Even rational rows supports automatic code generation. All right. So that MDA, model driven architecture, if you create models, you can generate programming language code. This one is model driven architecture paradigm, computation independent model created by business analysts to describe business processes. Uh, in a business organization, there are business analysts that they describe their business processes, which will be given to the organization that would develop it software or application created by architect designer to describe the architecture. In the software organization, after receiving the business process um, details, they create an architect architecture who creates an architect or a designer creates an architecture which is platform independent model. From platform independent model created by developer or tester to implement solution. Here we are not um uh, defining a language, a programming language. Here we are confined ourselves to the programming language. A programming language is chosen. It is platform specific model. Finally, the code is generated. This is model driven architecture paradigm. And here this figure shows a model driven architecture. Here you have meta model and then templates. Meta model means model that describes the model. Here this meta model describes application model, and through this code is generated application code, class employee, employee ID, name, address. Through application model, the details are acquired and code is generated. And this is model driven interpreter dev 2.0. Dev 2.0, what it does, it also uses model driven interpreter. There is a meta model that describes all the model, and this model creates a code in memory model. Okay, and this designer will go through this model repository and in memory model and come up with this. Going ahead, multi-tenant Dev 2.0 application virtualization. In Dev 2.0 platform using MDI, application specifications are merely data in a model repository. We have model repository. In that, application specification is stored, and in addition to interpreting and rendering any application model, a single instance of Dev 2.0 interpreter can potentially interpret multiple application models simultaneously. Dev 2.0 is a technology. This technology can interpret multiple application models at the same time. Therefore, Dev 2.0 platform is also multi-tenant platform. Multi-tenant platform means what happened? In this, there are multiple codes. Each one is one tenant. You have got multiple tenants. Security, error handling, transactions, and workflow. So far, we focused on developing abstractions for form-based transaction processing architectures so that application functionality could be modeled and interpreted by Dev 2.0 platform. An enterprise application also needs architectural support for technical features that are not directly related to functional components. And those are, there are functional components to any system and non-functional components. Functional components means which are very much necessary and for which the code is being written. That is functional components. Non-functional components are the secondary features that supports the functional components. So for instance, this application security. Without security, also the code can be implemented and can be executed. But then security is quite important to preserve the confidentiality, integrity of the data. So security is another component. Uniform error handling. Errors have to be handled. Transaction management is needed for each logical user interface, logical interaction, because transaction management has to support the tacit properties, atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. That all has to be supported, which is not primary functionality, rather a secondary one, but pretty important. The flow of work from user to user in order to accomplish a business process need to be handled through workflow management. Workflow management captures the flow of work from one user to another user. Like how a file moves from one officer to another officer, like that. How business uh, process, okay, is following a flow from one user to another user. That is workflow management. Technical architecture layers. These are the architecture layers: presentation and control, application security, business logic, error handling, workflow, data access, and transaction management. Application security. It is extremely important. Otherwise, the confidential and important data would be compromised. So there are some protocols like Kerberos protocol, which enables authentication over unsecured network. You can go for encrypted or hashed form, and you can use Windows Active Directory such as LDAP based identity management. For a security framework for web based architecture that decide level of secure authentication, that security framework, which involves transmitting a hashed user ID and password. This is all supported by Jazz library of Java. That supports authentication as well as more secure authentication. Kerberos. Cloud computing platforms such as Google's App Engine, Microsoft Azure also provide the option for authentication. This is all about security. Function access control, all the users, their roles. We studied that a user can be a owner, user can belong to a group of owner, or user can be a general public, others, public. So user roles have to be defined, role functions have to be defined, and those functions have to be implemented. This is relevant to a security framework essentially. Error handling. How can error be handled? If you recall, this in Java you have try, catch, finally, throws. Those are error handling mechanism. So different programming language would have a different mechanism for enabling application to report errors, to allow users to respond. Transaction management. Transaction management is necessary for concurrency control, for preserving atomicity, atomic user interaction, atomic database interaction. So these things have to be considered while developing a code, customized enterprise application. All right. Here, this is update table set where setting of the key. Okay, with this we have done with this chapter, and then we have this enterprise architecture and SOA. We did it. Then enterprise software we did, and custom custom applications also we have completed. In tomorrow's class, we will look at workflow and business processes. Okay, workflow and business processes, which is chapter number 15 in second book. Do you have any doubts in today's class? Or do you have any doubts in this subject? You can ask. Shirin, have you started writing the notes?
Yes, ma'am.
How much have you completed?
20%.
How many questions?
Ma'am?
How many questions you have completed?
20.
20. Oh,
Yes,
many
ma'am.
are there. Many are there. I think you have
I'll
completed.
be, I'll be finishing before semester exam.
Um, I think this week or next week I will be completing the syllabus, and then we will
Ma'am?
have seminars. This week or next week I will be completing the syllabus, and then
Okay,
we
ma'am.
will have seminars, and then I think one internal exams will be there, and
Okay, ma'am.
you will your final exams along with that exams will happen. So I please fill up the link so that it will be useful for many people, not only just for you. So I'm ending the class now. Manisha, do you have any doubts?
No, ma'am.
Have you started preparing for seminar?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you able to understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Shirin, what about you? Have you started preparing for seminar?
No, ma'am.
What is your topic?
Detection of skill lesions using artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it is a very good topic, Shirin.
Yes, ma'am.
You can search for in Google Scholar. Type this topic. You will get research papers.
Okay,
Choose
ma'am.
one paper, the latest paper, 2020 paper, and explain it. All right,
Okay,
students.
ma'am.
Bye for today. See you tomorrow.